We've been talking through the book of Revelation over the last few weeks. We've learned, one of the things we've learned is that people are blessed for reading the words of this prophecy and for hearing them and putting them into action. We've talked about the power of Jesus. Russ in the first week talked about the power of Jesus from Revelation 1. We then looked at how we should love the church honestly, that we could be real and genuine with each other. That was Revelation chapters 2 and 3. And then last week we talked about why worship is so important in our lives, chapters 4 and 5. Why worship is so important in our lives. We ended last week's message with the hope that the Lamb could open the seals of the scroll, the 7 seals of the scroll. And we found that he was worthy to do that, and we know the Lamb as Jesus Christ. Now, at this point, the churches, I think, reading this letter from John, felt really encouraged by the fact that the Lamb sacrificed himself in order to bring hope to the people of God. And we talked last week about the distractions that these church members would have faced having gone to church during that time, the persecutions they faced, and even death, because they chose to worship Jesus Christ. So they faced persecution and death, and the distractions they faced were probably a lot more severe than we face today as church people. So now we come to chapter 6 of Revelation, and for the church, I don't think they see things as looking so good. They've been encouraged by the sacrifice of the Lamb. We get to chapter 6, and to them, it almost seems like more of the same. More suffering, more persecution, more bad stuff is going to happen as we get into chapter 6. Now, it sounds like the suffering and persecution will never let up, and perhaps they echo the questions. If you've read through the chapters last week, through Revelation chapters 6 and 7, in verses 10 and 17 of chapter 6, maybe the churches are starting to echo these questions. How long and who can stand? Have you ever asked yourself that? How long am I going to have to put up with this? How long am I going to have to put up with the aches and pains and heartaches and troubles and things that happen in my life? And then, have you ever thought, how can I stand through this? How in the world am I going to get through these ordeals in my life? How long can I put up with this, and how am I going to be able to stand up through this? And so that's kind of what I want to look at. I want to take you back, though, to the time before Jesus died, was buried, and rose from the dead. Because Jesus makes a promise to his followers that I think would knock the wind out of anybody's sails. It's not a promise that we look at and go, oh man, I can't wait until that happens. And so I want to take you to the upper room. Jesus has gathered his followers, his disciples, in the upper room. At this point, I want to get to, he's already washed their feet. He's already broken the bread and distributed the wine, instituting the Lord's Supper. And now Jesus speaks to them without using parables, without using these stories. He speaks to them plainly so they can understand exactly what he's saying, without parables, without these stories. And he tells them what things are going to be like for them. And so John 16:33, Jesus tells them, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. Now, we like that part, don't we? We like that part. Oh, I have peace in Jesus. He gives me everything I need, and I'm secure, and I have an anchor, and I find in Jesus security and safety. But then Jesus makes this promise. In this world, you will have what? In this world, you will have trouble. You shall have trouble. There's no way around it. It's going to happen. What kind of troubles have you faced in this world? You know, you think about, you look over your life, maybe some of you are going through some things right now. For me, the troubles in my life, it wasn't easy growing up in a broken, divorced home. Just wasn't easy. Some of you are going through that now. It wasn't easy for me going to school and having kids challenge my faith in Jesus Christ and having teachers challenge my faith in Jesus Christ. It wasn't easy for me to find a way to pay for college. It wasn't easy for me to feel alone and dejected at times. In this world, you have trouble. For you, maybe it's not easy coming home to an unloving husband or an unloving wife. Maybe for you, it's not easy meeting deadlines at work. Maybe it's not easy raising your kids. Maybe it's not easy paying the bills every week. You're struggling with finances. It's not easy going through your illness right now. We have trouble and hardship. For the churches reading Revelation, it wasn't easy for them to be persecuted and to watch their brothers and sisters in Jesus Christ die because of their faith. So Jesus uses a word in John 16:33 for trouble. And the word is thlipsis. That's fun to say. Let's say that together. Ready? Thlipsis. One more time. Thlipsis. So here's a Greek lesson real quick today. I don't like to do this a lot, but thlipsis is the same word from which we get hardship or persecution or troubles or tribulation. I mean, you've heard that word before, tribulation. All right, so we get into Revelation chapter 6, and guess what word is used in chapter 6 of Revelation? Thlipsis, tribulation, the great tribulation. Now, you've heard the saying, maybe you've used it, all hell breaks loose. You've heard that saying before, oh man, all hell broke loose, and man, it was just crazy out there. Well, we get to Revelation chapter 6, hell doesn't break loose, heaven. All of heaven breaks loose as Jesus opens the 6 seals of the scroll. And I want to hone in. I want you to get something here today. Mark Moore writes in his book, How to Dodge a Dragon. He writes these words. He says, regarding chapter 6 of Revelation, this is not a description of what will take place, nor is this what did take place. This is a description of what always takes place. Make sure you understand that. We'll understand that a little bit more as we go throughout Revelation chapter 6. We'll understand the thlipsis, or the tribulation, or the sufferings that are always taking place. We're not waiting for some day when these things will happen. We're not looking back and saying, oh, they already happened. They're always happening in the world. So what do we find? As Jesus opens the 6 seals of the scroll, we find 6 tribulations, 6 sufferings, 6 thlipsis, if you will. So Revelation chapter 6, verse 2. John says, I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Now, we're going to get into 4 horses. If you go to Zechariah chapter 1, you read about the 4 horsemen. It's kind of an allusion to that. So we kind of tie in prophecy, Old Testament, prophecy, New Testament. They all tie in together. So we're going to see 4 horsemen. I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. So the first seal unleashes military invasion. Now, we're going to go through these pretty quickly. I hope you can take notes as fast as I can talk this morning. We got a lot of slides, right, Chris? 30-some slides. But we're going to go through it real quickly. It's going to be like drinking water out of a fire hose. That's hard to take in, but we'll go through these real quickly. So, military invasion. Which famous military leader is John talking about? I don't have any answers from you guys. Which one? Nero? Is he talking about Hitler? Is he talking about Genghis Khan? How about Osama bin Laden? Oh, Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi. Which one? All of them. All of them. He's talking about all military invaders. The first horseman represents all military invaders that will ever come and have ever come and are always coming. We're not waiting for one to usher in the end of time. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 24, verse 6, you will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. How often do we go, oh man, there's a war, the world's coming to an end? Jesus said these things are going to happen, but the end is still to come. How true that is. Do you know that since 1776, the United States of America has been at war for 222 years of its 239-year history? We're always at war with somebody. We've been at war with the British, the Native Americans, the Barbers, the Spanish, the Mexicans, the pirates, the Philippines, the Germans, the Japanese, the Russians, the Koreans, the Vietnamese, the Afghans, the Nicaraguans, the Iraqis, and the terrorists, and so many others. We got so good at war that we even fought ourselves in the Civil War. I mean, and this has been the case throughout the history of the world. There is always a war. There is always a military invader. We're not waiting for one special one to come along to usher in the coming of Jesus Christ. We're not looking off to the future where someday there will be a war that ushers in the coming of Jesus Christ. Wars are raging all around the world right now. This is the Great Tribulation, the sufferings to go through. It's happening right now. How many of you, you think sometime down the road you're going to suffer? How many of you are going through stuff right now? We're not waiting to suffer. It's happening right now. All right, so that's the first seal. Let's go to the second one. Jesus breaks open the second seal. It doesn't get any better. Verse 4, Revelation 6. Then another horse came out, a fiery red one. Its rider was given power to take peace from the earth, and to make men slay each other. To him was given a large sword. Second seal unleashes conflict and bloodshed. Conflict and bloodshed. Again, are we waiting for some time down the road at the end of time that this is going to start happening? I don't think so. How many of you are keeping up with the events that are happening in Baltimore? I mean, look what's going on. These guys, conflict and bloodshed is happening. Individuals are banding together to inflict harm and death upon police officers and other people. They're leaving parts of Baltimore on fire and damaged. They're keeping people from going to the baseball game. Heaven forbid. But it's led to the bloodshed and death of innocent victims. Conflict and bloodshed is happening right now. Right now. Doesn't anyone get along anymore? Doesn't seem like it. Remember as a kid seeing abortion clinics being blown up? We've seen police brutality. We've seen riots break out on city streets. We see domestic violence every day. We see child abuse. You open up the Barberton Herald, you read through the police section. I mean, just look at what's happening in our own city. I mean, it's happening here. People are suffering right now. We're not waiting for some special moment in history down the road. It's happening right now. We are suffering right now. It doesn't get any better. Jesus opens the third seal. When the Lamb opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come," and I looked, and there before me was a black horse. Its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand. Then I heard what sounded like a voice among the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a day's wages, and 3 quarts of barley for a day's wages, and do not damage the wine and the oil." Now, we get an illusion. It's going to be very expensive to eat. It's going to cost a day's wages to buy a loaf of bread. What does this mean? The third seal unleashes, we can call it famine. Famine. Now, you've seen the images from around the world. You know that famine is happening right now. We're not waiting for some end-of-the-world epidemic to strike the world and cause famine everywhere. It's happening right now. We see children starving in Africa. We see families going to the dumps in India to scrape for any morsels of food they can eat. And so we might think that famine only strikes these third world countries. That's why we call them third world countries. But I want to tell you that famine even reaches people right here in the United States of America. Have you seen the new Walmart commercial? Fight hunger. You go to Walmart, you buy some food, and there are certain items. I did this a couple days ago. I went and bought a loaf of bread, and on the loaf of bread, it said, "Fight hunger. Because you bought this item, an item will be given to fight hunger here in the United States," right here in our city. Right here in our city. There are starving children right here in our nation and right here in our city. And I can tell you of families that are sleeping in cars, moms with their children sleeping in cars and cemeteries because they can't afford to rent a house. They can't afford to feed their children. I can tell you of homeless men and women I worked with in Youngstown that would come down and we'd hand out food and clothing just to stand on a street corner to get money and food to bring home to their children and feed them. I can tell you stories of kids in our own schools right here in Barberton who go home after school every day and have to fend for themselves because mom and dad aren't home. We have children starving right here. Famine has hit the United States of America, and famine has hit Barberton. We are suffering right now. We're not waiting for some day when it will happen. It is happening, and it is always happening. Our world suffers, and I would venture to say many of us in this room are suffering today, right now, this hour. John continues, the fourth seal is opened. I looked, and there before me was a pale horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind him. They were given power over a fourth of the earth to kill by sword, famine, plague, and wild beasts of the earth. The fourth seal unleashes death. Death. I read a report that the CDC knows it could happen. The huge epidemic that could wipe out a fourth of the world. Whether it be some disease or whatever, it can happen. And it may already be happening. But death, no one is immune, right? No one can escape death. Hebrews 9:27 says, it is appointed unto men once to die. We all get to go through it. 100% mortality rate sitting in this room today. We all will die. We all will die. Death is already here, and we suffer. I just lost my grandmother last week. I know how real death is now. And it's sad. We go through it. Matt Proctor, in his book called Victorious, which I get some of this information from, he wrote this: the fourth horseman is death himself. The echo of hoofbeats sound in every era, every community, every life. His means are many: sword, famine, disease, wild animals, but the end is always the same: caskets, funerals, graveyards, and weeping families left behind. Death is imminent. Death happens now. We're not waiting. It's happening all around us. The suffering continues. Let's continue on. The fifth seal. John says, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and the testimony they had maintained. The fifth seal shows Christian persecution. Christian persecution. We tend to think this is a thing of the past, don't we? We live in a country where, we have the freedom to worship however we please. There is no law for or against religion. We can pray, we can read our Bibles, we can sing our worship songs, we can turn on whatever radio station we want to listen to and worship God through that. We can do whatever we want when it comes to religion in the United States. We don't think of Christian persecution. We think that's a long time ago thing. We look at Hebrews chapter 11. And it says, some faced jeers and flogging, while others were chained and put in prison. They were stoned. They were sawed in two. And they were put to death by the sword. And that was happening. It was happening way back then. Guess what? It still happens today. I was reading about China. There was a report that just came out last week. Last year in China, in 2014, alone, over 17,000 individuals were persecuted for their religious beliefs. 17,000 Christians. Authorities detained some 3,000 because they held faith in Jesus Christ. Of the 3,000, 1,200 were sentenced to death because of their faith in Jesus Christ in China. That's up from just 14 in the year 2012. It's happening more and more around the world. Christians are being put in prison in Kenya. They're being killed in India and China. I was reading on the website opendoorsusa.org. They report that every month, get this, every month, 322 Christians are being put to death around the world. 322 Christians every month. 214 churches and Christian properties are being destroyed every month. And some 772 forms of violence are being committed against Christians every month. Christian persecution is going on right now. We're not waiting for some period at the end of time to see that Christians will be persecuted and will be put to death as martyrs. It's happening right now. We are suffering. Jesus said, in this world you will suffer. It's a promise. I don't like it. I don't want to suffer. But it's a promise. Jesus opens the sixth seal. Let's move on. Things don't get any better. I watched as he opened the sixth seal. There was a great earthquake. The sun turned black, like sackcloth made of goat hair. The whole moon turned blood red, and the stars in the sky fell to the earth, as late figs drop from a fig tree when shaken by a strong wind. The sky receded like a scroll, rolling up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. The sixth seal unleashes natural disasters. Are we waiting for natural disasters to someday strike our world and nation? What happened a couple weeks ago in Nepal? Big earthquake. We saw the devastation of an earthquake in Nepal. CNN reported, this was just last Tuesday, they reported about this. More than 4,600 dead, over 9,000 injured, 8 million affected across Nepal, 1 million children urgently in need of help. I read a couple days ago that the Himalayan mountains has dropped an inch because of this earthquake. Are we waiting for natural disasters to happen? Like, are we waiting for the big one? What big one do you want? They're happening. Tsunamis, earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes. Every one of you have images. It's happening all around the world. Within the last few years, we're seeing it happen right now. We're not waiting for these things to happen. They're already happening, and they're devastating people, homes, entire cities, entire countries. It's happening. Jesus said, in this world, you will have thlipsis. You will suffer. You will go through trials. You will go through tribulations. It's a promise. And many of us face suffering today. You have family issues. You're suffering through temptations that you can't overcome. People make fun of us because we call ourselves Christians. Some of us are struggling from paycheck to paycheck. Some of us might be hungry, facing famine in our lives. Some of us have loved ones who are off to war and fighting. Our hearts break for those who are devastated by earthquakes and other natural disasters. Certainly, great suffering and great tribulation has happened, is happening, will continue to happen, and will happen until the end, till Jesus returns. There's more to verse 33 of John chapter 16. In this world you have trouble and persecution, thlipsis. Jesus says, but take heart. I have overcome the world. I have overcome the world. There's promise for those who follow Jesus. Not only will we suffer, but Jesus says, in me, it'll be okay. I'll get you through this. Revelation chapter 6 describes the thlipsis that always takes place, but God has done something about human suffering. God is doing something about human suffering, and God will ultimately one day bring human suffering to an end. It will cease. In the meantime, 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 5, Paul writes to Timothy, but mark this, there will be terrible times in the last days. Again, are we waiting for these things? Let's read. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of the good, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying its power. Are we waiting for the end of time for these things to happen? It's happening right now. We are living in the last days. We are living in the last days right now. Verse 12 of the same chapter in Timothy says, in fact, everyone who wants to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be what? Persecuted. Persecution leads to what? Suffering. Satan is after us. He's making your life miserable. He wants you to suffer. Second Thessalonians chapter 1, however, says this. All of this is evidence that God's judgment is right, and as a result, you will be counted worthy of the kingdom of God for which you are suffering. God is just. He will pay back trouble to those who trouble you and give relief to you who are troubled and to us as well. This will happen when the Lord Jesus is revealed from heaven in blazing fire with his powerful angels. I don't like this promise from Jesus because I don't want to suffer. It's not fun. But one day we will be victorious through Jesus Christ. In Revelation chapter 7, I kind of get an interlude, a reprieve, if you will, between the 6th and 7th seals. We get a sneak peek of the bigger picture. Chapter 6 ends with this question, for the great day of their wrath has come, and the question is asked, who can stand? Who can get through this? In chapter 7, we read the answer, we can. We can. Howard, I'm going to have you wait just for a moment, okay? Just give me a couple minutes. We can stand. The people of Jesus Christ can stand. So in chapter 7, we read two visions from John. John sees two visions in heaven. And I'm going to tell you, they're parallel visions. They're parallel visions. They mean the same thing, but the emphasis on each one is different. We read about the 144,000. That's the first vision. The second vision is the great multitude, all right, that no one could count. Now, I don't want you to get caught up in numbers here. I don't want you to think, oh my goodness, 144,000, that's it, that's all that's going to be saved at the end of time. Don't get caught up in that. I want to give you a quick lesson in numerology, okay? I've got this in your notes, so write this down. The number 12 represents completion. Number 12 represents completion. When you get to 12, it's like all things are finished, complete. Number 1,000 represents vastness, a huge amount. John sees 12 tribes in heaven, and they represent the new Israel, which is the church. All right? So let's do a little bit of math. 12 times 1,000 times 12 tribes is 144,000, but that equals the vast and complete people of God. John doesn't see an actual number, but what it represents is the vast and complete number of the people of God. It's not 143,999. Why? Because Jesus goes after the lost sheep, the lost member of the church, and he brings them back. It's 144,000 because not one follower of Jesus Christ is missing. Does that make sense? It's a complete number. Jesus isn't saying exactly 144,000 people are going to be saved. 144,000 represents the complete and vastness of the people of God. All right, so let's go to verse 9, because after 144,000, John has this second vision, and he says, after this I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and in front of the Lamb. They were wearing white robes and were holding palm branches in their hands. Isn't that a neat vision? Now, John's vision of the multitude parallels his vision of the 144,000. The emphasis is different, however. Take note. Write this in your notes. I've got a dividing line in there between 144,000 and the multitude. The 144,000 people represent God's people in the present. Us right now. The second is God's people in the future. The ones to come. The great multitude is the multitude that is to come. Let me go further. The first is a symbol of the number of God's complete people. It symbolizes the completeness, 144,000. The second is the reality of God's people, a great multitude that no one can count. Vast and vast amounts of people. The first is a figurative illustration of the church as Israel, the new Israel. The second is a literal image of God's people from every nation, tribe, tongue, and people. All right? The first shows our security in God right now, and the second shows our salvation in heaven when we get there one day. All right, so that's what it's all about. We're not looking at a literal 144,000 people being saved. It's talking about the God's complete number of people. What does all this mean? What's it really come down to? Here it is. If we remain faithful right now in the middle of God's story, we are victorious in the end. It doesn't mean our sufferings go away, unfortunately. It means we have to endure what we go through here on this earth patiently, because in the end we win. In Revelation chapter 7 and verse 13, John writes, "Then one of the elders asked me, 'These in white robes, who are they? Where did they come from?'" He's talking about the great multitude. John says, "I answered, 'Sir, you know where they're from.' And he said, 'These are they who have come out of the great tribulation, thlipsis. They're the ones who have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Therefore they are before the throne of God and serve him day and night in his temple, and he who sits on the throne will spread his tent over them. Never again will they hunger. Never again will they thirst. The sun will not beat upon them, nor any scorching heat. For the Lamb at the center of the throne will be their shepherd. He will lead them to springs of living water, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes." People, you may be suffering now, but one day, no more. I can't wait. It breaks my heart to see all this stuff going on in the world. One day we will be victorious. You need to hear this today. If you're going through hard times, the message from Revelation chapter 7 is this: heaven awaits, and God has not forgotten you. There is hope, and you matter to God because Jesus has overcome the world. Jesus has overcome, and we have victory.